received a municipal tax bill or heard someone else talk about theirs and didn't understand all the jargon? Maybe you've wondered what happens to the money after you pay your taxes. In this week's video, I'm discussing the broad brushstrokes of how municipalities get money and spend it. I'll use the example of the distribution of residential tax dollars in Selwyn Township to demonstrate municipal tax dollars at work. I'll wrap up by leaving you with some important aspects to discuss with your candidates, information I think is important for considering when casting your vote. By some key concepts. In the most basic sense, a budget is an estimate of the money brought in and the money that you anticipate to spend over a set period of time. Ontario's municipalities generate two separate types of budgets each year, an operating budget and a capital budget. An operating budget estimates and breaks down the day-to-day services that will be provided in the municipality and the costs anticipated to provide those services. For example, how much money is needed for the electricity at the local community library or community center, or how much it will cost to pay staff. In comparison, a capital budget reflects the larger and long-term projects that the municipality decide to take on, such as building a new community center. The estimation of the services needed, the costs associated with larger projects, these are considered every year, like the operating budget, just to ensure that these projects are on track and money is available. But where does the funding come from? Each budget receives funding through specific sources and for different reasons. Let's look at the operating budget first. A large portion of the services provided under the operating budget are covered through residents paying property taxes. The short explanation of a property tax is that it's an amount of money that is calculated by multiplying the current value assessment of a property against the tax rate. Before I can explain the property tax and provide an example, which I'm going to do in a minute, I have to explain the decision-making process around property taxes. I'm going to use this generic flowchart to conceptualize the process of how a municipality moves from estimating an operational budget to calculating individual households and business tax bills. At the top, we have the previous year's operating budget to help estimate how much it will cost the township to provide the same services it already has. Then a municipality considers inflation and other foreseen costs and factors that will need to be covered, such as replacing light bulbs or road signs. Additionally, if there are new daily operational services such as a new bus route, and these don't fall under the capital budget, these are factored in as well. Together, these elements point to a benchmark of how much money the municipality will need to raise in order to keep providing the services to residents. The next step is to determine how to divide this amount up across all the municipality's taxers. When a resident opens their electronic or their physical version of a tax bill, first they glare down at the bottom line because, well, any bill is daunting in one form or another. However, when you take in the whole document, the bottom line is a consolidation or a bringing together of different components that individuals in a township are required to pay for. Think of this as buying or paying into a stake of the township. Some municipalities use the term ratepayer instead of taxpayers when referring to paying taxes because over time more components have become woven into the formula with the property tax, and sometimes different areas of a municipality pay different rates because they receive different services. For example, if residents are located in a two-tiered system, like Selwyn Township is a lower-tier municipality under the upper-tier municipality of the County of Peterborough, a component of the property consolidated tax rate is set by the upper tier to cover services and resources that are shared. So we talked about recycling before, same thing. At the bottom of this flowchart is the final an individual receives. Now that we have a better idea of the why money is being raised under an operating budget, let's jump back to exploring the property tax to understand how the township calculates how much taxes are from year to year. Remember when I explained in my previous video that local government in Canada was made up of two branches, municipalities and special purpose bodies? Well, the current value assessment of a property is determined by the Municipal Property Assessment Corporation, MPAC, an Ontario special purpose body that conducts research, generates databases and reports, and provides information to taxpayers and governments about properties. This body develops the current value assessment of properties each year. That is, they provide an estimate, market value based on a property. MPAC evaluates existing land and structures every 4 years and uses a phase-in method to equally split the increase over the following 4 years. MPAC also provides classifications for properties. These are different classes and include residential, rural, farming, hospitality, industrial, and others. Each type of property is provided a different tax class, and when placed against a municipality's formula, this leads to different tax rates a resident can owe. A property can also have more than one classification, as the property value reflects factors unique to each property, such as its age, dwelling square footage, location, so waterfront, non-waterfront, lot size, quality construction, and more. Back to the municipal role in determining the tax rate. Through the budget process, the municipality determines the amount they need to collect through taxation, and now they need to know how much each class will pay. MPAC provides them with the assessment values by class, so now they can determine how that amount will be shared by multiplying it by the tax ratio to get the weighted assessment. This is where it gets tricky for those not aware of the different levels of government who play a significant role in determining the bottom line on a municipal tax bill. A tax bill ratio is another fun calculation in the hierarchy of decision making that leads to the final amount you see on your tax bill. The sequence from a top-down perspective is provincial ranges, county ratios, and municipal rates. At the bottom of the decision-making ladder, municipalities set the tax rate for each property classification. That is, in Selwyn, the council decides the exact amount each property classification will pay in a given year. However, to decide this number, councillors look at the ratios set by the County of Peterborough for each property class. That is, there is a spectrum of how much the county thinks should be paid or collected for each property classification. This sliding scale allows municipalities flexibility to decide if they want to collect more than needed, say they foresee costs increasing dramatically and need to have a good buffer zone, or maybe they're going to collect less, maybe inflation didn't hit so hard the previous year. In turn, the county's ratios fall within a prescribed range set by the province. A range is a stipulated limit on how much a municipality can request from taxpayers for different property classifications, and this approach is set out in legislation. These ranges are set to ensure municipalities are never asking too much, that is, that they're only asking for enough money to support the operating budget, nor that they're never asking for too little, them falling financially short into a crisis and unable to pay for services or to pay their contracted employees. In short, the province of Ontario and Peterborough County have a hand in determining the rate set by the Township of Selwyn and the final amount you see on your municipal tax bill. To put all this information about property taxes into perspective, let's look at Selwyn Township's 2022 distribution of residential tax dollars. Here we can see the term ratepayer is used because there are two different rates, one for those in rural areas and one for those in the village of Lakefield. Looking at the rural ratepayer pie shape, you can see that 18 cents per dollar goes to education, 28 cents to municipal services, 45 cents to the County of Peterborough, 1 cent to the services provided by Autonomy Conservation Authority, and 8 cents goes to police services. Looking at the village ratepayer pie graph, you can see the costs associated with different services are different. The biggest difference is the policing services because Lakefield is covered by the City of Peterborough Police Services, while Ennismore and Smith are served by the Ontario Provincial Police. All other rates that make up the consolidated tax rate are the same. Selwyn Township also provides a breakdown of the different tax classes and the difference in rates for rural and village residents. Recalling from my first video, the wards of Ennismore and Smith are predominantly rural and prime agricultural land without rural infrastructure, while the village of Lakefield is small and built up with urban infrastructure such as water treatment. Peterborough Utilities manages the day-to-day operations of Selwyn Township's water and wastewater system in the village of Lakefield and Woodland Lakers in Smith. In Lakefield, residents receive a tax bill from Peterborough Utilities, and in Woodland Lakers, property owners see a local improvement charge on their tax notice over and above the tax levy. These are based on rates determined through the budget process. Additional funding for the operating budget, that is, money collected beyond the property taxes component, comes through provincial and federal partnerships specifically aimed to help municipalities provide basic and necessary services to their residents. In Ontario, we have the Municipal Partnership Fund, which is a general assistance grant provided to support municipalities facing difficult financial circumstances, challenges with property assessments, and in general helps with year-to-year funding changes. For example, in 2022, the province has allocated $500 million for this partnership, and of Ontario's 444 municipalities, 398 received a portion of that money. It's important to note here that a good chunk of this money goes to municipalities in rural, northern, or remote areas because they have larger geographical areas to service and smaller populations. So it costs more for them to provide those services, and this fund helps in part to reduce the cost on property taxes that residents pay. One final example of how municipalities gain funding for their operating budget is through user fees. Here, municipalities require a fee to access services such as street parking or holding a membership at a community center. Comparatively, funding of the capital budget, that is, money brought in and allocated to large and long-term projects beyond the everyday costs covered under the operating budget, are primarily gained through grants and partnerships with the provincial and federal government and some private partnerships. The money from property taxes can be allocated here as well, or from municipal reserves. The breakdown of capital budget funding sources all come down to each individual municipality's capacity, planning, and proactive partnerships. An example is Ennismore, with the upgrades to the Robert E. Young Community Center. The community got together and raised a lot of money through fundraising efforts, but even with contributions from the township, we were still short. In turn, we had to ask for large grants from the federal and provincial government to see the project completed, and this took many years, as well as hard work, dedication, and perseverance of many actors involved. Collectively, the planning and consideration of both the operating budget and the capital budget go hand in hand for running a municipality smoothly and effectively. However, there is one important difference between the two types of budgets. The province of Ontario requires municipalities to balance the operating budget each and every year. In short, municipalities are expected not to have debt related to the day-to-day operational costs. There are some ways around this, but for the most part, legislation restricts municipalities from accessing bank loans, or certain partnerships offset the debt incurred for the day-to-day practices. This means if a municipality foresees that it will not bring in enough money to pay for those services, or does not have enough money saved in reserve, it has to make important decisions. Example is increasing property taxes or cutting services. Neither of those options are appealing to taxpayers who depend on those services. So council and staff have to think very critically about how to ensure the anticipated costs for a municipality will be covered each and every year. Because the capital budget reflects projects that could take many years and large sums of money, the capital budget does not, and in most cases cannot, be balanced each and every year. The costs are stretched out over the long term and the financial value is never concrete. However, there can be unanticipated changes to municipalities' plans which need to be considered each and every year for larger projects. And these could halt or speed up a project, which could lead to more or less money being allocated somewhere that it was previously intended. However, the trend we are seeing is that more and newer or novel services are appearing at the local level that weren't provided by municipalities before. This is due to the federal and provincial government downloading services to municipalities, usually to alleviate their own debts, and sometimes this is in exchange for large pockets of funding. It's also more common to see a municipality's residents wanting more services provided by a local authority who knows the needs of the residents well and knows how to put those services in place that work best for the community. For example, with the rise of attention to climate change, we are seeing more environmental and sustainability efforts, transcending from the international or even national objectives such as managing food waste, down to municipalities implementing those efforts, in some cases such as green waste collection or composting projects. However, these efforts remain a newer service area and municipalities may not have the expertise or resources available to provide those services right away. In turn, they have to allocate funding and time for third parties such as consulting companies to do the research and provide recommendations before council can generate the necessary strategic plans and put bylaws into place for these services. Overall, balancing a budget is important for accountability and transparency because it forces municipalities to indicate to taxpayers what their money is being spent on, as well as provide details about where, when, how, and why the money is spent on certain things over others. This approach is different from the federal and provincial levels in Canada, where budgets are not required to be balanced, and we see these levels in significant debt. Further, compared to the provincial and federal levels, we see less dramatic change in local municipalities after every election because requirement to balance the operating budget is a safeguard against new councillors and staff from quickly adding or taking away services and or degrading the quality of those services. For example, if you look at the calendar of a council meetings, you can see that the consideration and writing of budget spreads over 4 to 6 months or more. In this time span, councillors and staff deliberate where and how money is to be spent and what makes the most sense. Nothing can be put in place right away unless something imperative like a crisis occurred. And even in these circumstances, the municipalities are supposed to have reserves put in place for those unique circumstances. All right, we've come this far in this tedious business. Let's bring this full circle. Why is all this important as a voter? Every year, your taxes are likely to raise due to inflation, increased values associated with your property value, and broader societal trends such as housing crisis or natural disasters that distribute supply chains. An important and scary aspect here is that when councillors are deciding how to balance the operating budget and factor in long-term costs for capital projects, a council has the capacity to determine the rate year to year under the municipal budget. An interesting example is that councillors can suggest property taxes are not increased in one budget cycle, and this has been done to appease to voters ahead of an election. However, that money usually has to be made up later. This could result in property taxes rising by 5 or even 10% in the following year. So, in my opinion, taking such an approach is reckless, especially with many families already on shoestring budgets with issues around housing affordability and rising food costs and transportation costs. Further, the majority of ratepayers don't budget for this type of jump. In Selwyn, the current and previous councils have kept the rise of residential tax rates around 3% each year to avoid any risky business. And if elected, my aim is to keep that legacy strong. All in all, ahead of the 22 election in October, as a voter of Selwyn Township, it's important to ask your candidate what they intend to do regarding taxes and to keep your councillor in check. Are they doing what they said they would do in their platforms? Are they considering all the different options for raising large sums of money for capital projects? Do they have any new or innovative ideas that really shake up the township? And what are the consequences? Are they scary or are they exciting? This will hint at their knowledge of the tax system as well as how perceptive they are of what the township has already been doing. Here too, consider asking what gaps or shortfalls they've seen in the past and how they might be attended to in a way that's both friendly to voters' budgets and the development of the community as a whole. I do want to note that taxes are a tricky subject and not everyone, even long-term councillors, are well versed in our tax system. So be kind, but be proactive and make your current councillors and candidates aware of your concerns regarding municipal taxes. Thanks for watching. I hope this information has been helpful. Did you like the content? Over the course of my campaign, I'll be releasing more short videos diving into the important facets of municipal government and politics in our township. The goal is to educate others, make municipal politics more engaging, and promote my campaign ahead of the 2022 Selwyn Township election. Want to know more about what I have to offer? Add a comment. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, and share to make others aware.